All right. Hey, it is a blessing to have Matt Schaub on The Joy of Leadership today. Matt, it's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
NFL quarterback extraordinaire. Started with the Falcons, ended with the Falcons, had some great years in between. I'm itching to dive in on those. But Matt, I would love to start kind of in a bit of a chronological order with this.
Sure.
And I would love to hear you were lived in Westchester, but born in Pittsburgh, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so tell me about kind of what got you into athletics even right from the beginning? When did that become a real passion for you?
At a young age.
Okay.
I have an older sister, so 2 kids, parents, awesome in our lives, and just we were very blessed to have parents that we did. We moved around a bunch growing up. My dad worked on the railroad, so we moved Pittsburgh to Albany, New York, to outside Chicago, Detroit, and then to outside Philadelphia and Westchester, Pennsylvania, and all
Some
that.
pretty rough areas.
Very.
Yeah.
But also really heavy into sports.
Right.
You know, some of those cities, great sports teams.
Yep.
All that was before 3rd grade.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
then, fortunately, we were able to settle in Westchester throughout my schooling, through high school, and then graduate high school there. But I got into sports early.
Okay.
I was probably 3-4 years old.
No way.
As soon as I could walk, playing t-ball, youth basketball. Football didn't come along until I was big enough. Because back then, you had to be a certain height, weight, and all that. There was no flag.
Right.
So I got into that in 3rd grade.
Okay. Very cool. Now, were either one of your parents, were they the motivating factor behind that, or what did that look like?
My dad played sports growing up. He
Okay.
played 3 sports, football, basketball, baseball in his young life, and he played basketball in college. They never pushed me to it. It was just something I wanted to do. Obviously, as parents, they're going to get us involved in things. So they put me into but I loved it.
Yeah.
We were always in the backyard playing catch or, playing ball. That was my upbringing.
Right.
And, but they didn't force it on me or my sister. They let us just have it. It grew organically within us.
Right.
But then they just fostered and just encouraged us to get involved and play. And, that's where it started.
Your sister was an athlete as well?
She was.
Okay, cool. So I love the fact that your passion was internal. It's funny. I so often see, just working in education for such a long time, sports is always a big part of the whole educational process. The truth of the matter is we grow so much through the direction of our coaches, for good and for bad. I mean, you've been in it playing through your whole life. Mm-hmm. You've seen some good coaches. You've probably seen some bad coaches as well. But what I've found is that in high school, one of the biggest times when kids quit is in their junior year. Truthfully, they're usually pretty hot athletes when they're leaving. Like they're kind of at the top of their game. But so often their motivation came through their parents.
Right.
It was like people forcing them to be involved.
Sure.
And so in your junior, you start to think on your own a little bit. And I've watched so many kids who could have been pretty stellar athletes, maybe even at the next levels, who end up bailing out early.
Right.
And it's because the motivation didn't come from inside.
Well, I think there's 2 factors in that. They're pushed.
Right.
Their parents are living vicariously through them.
Living vicariously.
Because of their shortfalls or shortcomings as a young person.
Yeah.
But also this, especially nowadays, the push to have the kids play year round.
Yes.
And focus on one sport. And that's something whenever I talk to youth or teams or anything like that is to let these kids enjoy multiple sports. Let them have a 3-month season.
Yes.
And then go and have some time off and then go play the next sport. And then let them try everything. Eventually, their likes and their passions will come to the forefront and then go from there.
Right.
But that shouldn't happen until they're 13, 14, 15 years old. But even then, let them be kids and let them learn because that passion, they'll be excited to go to practice. They'll be excited when that season comes.
Yeah.
But there's so much to be learned from different sports and different activities that when you try to just focus everything at 10 years old on one thing, those kids will get burnt out. And then you'll see them when they get an opportunity to make a decision, they'll push back.
Right. Now, you and your bride, you guys have 5 kids.
We do.
How are you doing that with your own kids? Is that something you're pretty consciously aware of?
We are. We have three girls and then a boy and then another girl who's in kindergarten. So
you guys are outnumbered. You and
big
your son.
time. We're in a zone defense completely, and we went from 1 to 3. So our 2 and 3 are twins.
Twins, yeah.
So we immediately went from 2-on-1 to then we're full. We skip man to man, and now we went to a zone defense. So, but it's one thing that my wife Laurie and I we've consciously talked about is what they want to do.
Right.
And for a while with our 3 oldest girls, we did have them when they were 5, 6, 7 doing similar activities, whether that was gymnastics, cheerleading, or whatever it was. And it was probably about 10 years old when we said their likes and what they wanted to do started to split.
Right.
And we said, look, okay, this is where if they want to try something, let's do it and see what happens. And then if they want to keep doing it, we just let them lead. And we just helped encourage and be positive when they're in their endeavors and just really let them drive that car.
Yeah. Did they feel any pressure having a parent who was a professional athlete? Do you feel like they see any pressure in that?
I don't think so.
No.
I didn't feel that.
Yeah, I don't ever see it from you. You're such a chill guy.
Well, I think you'd have to ask them.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you can if you see
maybe
them
I
around
have a
campus.
chance,
But I don't think so. And I tried to really let them ask the questions. You know, I did early on have to caution myself of getting in the car after a competition or whatever and giving them tips, or not that I know what they were doing, but some of the intangibles of, okay, how did you feel that went, and trying to coach them. Right. I haven't been their coach, but I've tried to be their cheerleader and let them.
I love that, actually.
But it's been hard. I can't say it's been easy, but it's been a conscious effort, especially, the past couple years of letting them, hey, what do I do about this, Dad? Or this was tough, or this was really good. And then I try to just, mold some of my responses from my experiences. But I can't just bombard them because they don't want to hear about that in that moment. That's
such great parenting advice. Really, truly, like, be your kid's cheerleader, not their coach. Like, I love that. Youth sports has just taken, in many regards, such a dark turn. It has just become life for people. It's all they spend their money on. It's all they spend their time on. And they're chasing something that's so elusive. I mean, I think sometimes it really is just kind of vicarious living, that they maybe weren't a great athlete or whatever, and they're trying to live that out.
Right. And I think it all comes from a great place. Yeah. Because you want your child to experience the best. Right. You want them to have it better than you had it, or be better than you possibly were, when you were young. But I think it's something, but then the schedule gets filled. Yeah. And then you're running around and you never have a real chance to breathe. Right. Let the kid go out and play. Get home from school, do whatever homework, but then get out and go and just explore and be a kid. Go play. Just find some friends in the neighborhood. I think that's getting lost because you immediately get home and then it's like, okay, we have this at 5 o'clock, this at 6:30, and the next thing you know, it's 9 o'clock, and you're rushing everyone to bed, and you really don't have a chance to connect and just live.
Yeah, it's funny. We lived before moving here closer to Atlanta. We lived for 15 years in Savannah, and our last year there was during COVID time, right? So I took this job just before COVID broke out. But that was one of the things. We lived in this really beautiful golf course neighborhood. I mean, it was a really nice place. But you honestly, you'd think no children live in this whole neighborhood. I mean, it was a big neighborhood, Yeah. But then during COVID, all of their schedules stopped because everything got canceled, and our roads were filled with kids going biking and going out, and like, you actually had kids going home and just playing. Yes. Creatively having to come up with things, being physical, but not in planned play, just in play that takes place as you're living life. And it felt so much healthier. Sure. The youth sports really does kind of take a toll. So you started playing football in 3rd grade. Yes. I knew you were a 3-sport athlete. You hold a ton of records still at your high school that you graduated from. When was it? Like, when were you immediately good? And did you immediately want more? Like, when does that come for a person? Like, as a professional athlete, when does that happen?
Early on, I would say the desire to be better. I can't really put my finger on where or how or when. I think it helped. I read, and my dad had a lot of things saved from his upbringing and his athletic endeavors. I mean, granted, that was back in, I don't want to date my dad, but I mean, grew up in the 60s. Yeah. So his high school years and his college, and, so it challenged me because I wanted to be like my dad. Yeah. And he saw the fire and the drive that I had to want to be better, be the best quarterback, the best pitcher, the best hitter, the best, 2 or 3 in basketball. Like, that was what I wanted to do, but I always wanted to excel. I was never comfortable or never satisfied with just being okay.
Right.
But I don't know what specific point that was. I think it was just the evolution over time of just playing sports. What did it come naturally to some degree? I think I was blessed with some natural athletic ability, but you only get better if you practice, and that's in anything,
right?
Whether it's our faith in school, our studies, or in sports, all those things.
Were you immediately kind of one of the best players on the teams that you were playing with?
I think I would defer to my parents and some of my teammates. I never was one to try to say that I was.
Right.
I think the short answer, probably.
Yeah. It came naturally to you.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
I mean, that's where you look at kind of how I was speaking in chapel this week in our lower school, and just talking about how God directs us with this mindset of like, God designs in us things that we are naturally good at. God designs in us, like literally designs in us things that we really love. And it's the intersection of those things that we're naturally good at and the things that we love. If you can find your gig in the center of that, then you're living with joy and you're living with fulfillment. So often people are like, I'm going to choose this job because it makes X amount of dollars, or I'm going to choose this job because it sounds cool,
right?
Rather than trying to live in that spot. And like so often, particularly working in youth culture, kids get so discouraged, like, oh, I wish I was good at math, or I wish I was. And yet God's literally designing your path that you only recognize in hindsight how he was directing our course, you know?
And I think that's so valuable to share with young people, because there's so many distractions, there's so many influences, especially in this day and age, that it can really be overwhelming and cumbersome on the young minds. And so to help them navigate and find what they love, what their passion is, and where that intersection is with what they're really their strong suits and what their natural gifts are. Right. It can be hard, but I think that's so vital because it's important for them to have that direction.
Right. Tell me about high school for you. You went to school in Westchester East.
Yes.
And a lot of big guys came out of that school. From what I did, a little bit of research. I mean, number of guys came out of that school in big ball programs. Tell me about what high school looked like for you as an athlete. You were recognized very early and did some amazing things. What were the challenges to that as well? Like being successful in high school as a young guy, not fully developed mentally or physically. What were some of the biggest challenges there?
I was fortunate. There was no cell phones. There was no social media. We're talking in the 90s. So it was a great time to grow up and to be a young kid playing sports, going to school. Had a great experience, a lot of great friends. And a lot of my really close friends played all three sports, football, basketball, baseball with me. So it was like you just got done school, and the same guys that you hung out with, you go to the locker room and you get your practice and you go play and cut it loose and have a blast. And so there really wasn't a lot of pressure or
no kidding. That's great. A simpler time.
It really was.
Yeah.
I mean, it would, the tough parts were when you lost or you didn't make it further in states or anything like that. But as far as the difficulty and those challenges, it's hard to point to any that came from just being in high school and growing up there. It was more, I always tried to be tougher and more of a critic on the inside and of the person in the mirror than the outcome or our team. And that was the great thing about playing team sports, is you're only as good as those that are next to you.
That's right.
And the accountability you have to them.
That's right.
That make you better, but also, hey, I need to do what I have to do so that you can do your job. That's right. And I got to do my best. So I love that about team sports. And that's where, but then I also love the dichotomy of like an individual sport. Like I love playing golf now in my older years now, but because it's just me. Yeah. There's no one to blame. I can't, no one to look to like, hey, I'm not having my best day. I need you to, pick me up.
That's right.
But that's what I loved about team sports.
When did your faith journey begin? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I grew up, my parents, were spiritual and very religious. They were faithful, and I grew up in the Presbyterian church. Was baptized into it, and we were faithful all growing up. And then, it's a journey. We've talked about that, and so I think along the ways, not that I lost connection, but you get distracted, and I was a victim of that myself, and that was something that probably about 10 years ago, my wife was a big influence in. Me reconnecting and reaffirming to my faith and, turning to God and to Jesus for, grace and salvation, because we went through a tough time with the birth of our son 10 years ago. We were transitioning. I was traded from Houston to the Oakland Raiders, and she was pregnant with our son. And we already had 3 girls that at that point were 4 and almost 3. So there was a lot there. And so it was kind of a tough time because we had been there for 8 years in Houston. Very traumatic in my professional life to get traded and realize, okay, I can no longer be the starter here. I'm going to this new place. So it comes with its own challenges. And so that there were complications with the birth of my son. And fortunately, God blessed us to have the right doctors. And we looked at it as we were put in this position because we were at a great hospital. My wife was taking care of my son when he was born prematurely, 3 months premature.
Oh my goodness. How much did he weigh?
He was about 2.5 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And so we were in the NICU for 3 months that whole football season with our son. And so there were a lot of complications, but we were blessed to have some amazing doctors, an amazing facility. And it was like, this was where we were supposed to be. And looking at it at that time, we prayed a lot about that situation. What if we weren't here? What could have been the outcome?
Right.
And, God put us in that space. And that's when everything just clicked. Like, I need to reaffirm and reevaluate, my daily, where I'm turning to for advice, for direction.
Right. You're in the Bible study that I teach on Friday mornings. We talk a lot in there about the idea of moving from religion to actual having personal faith. Yeah. So you grew up in a religious home. You grew up in a home that's going to church, doing the things. But it really was that event, though, that brought you to understanding what personal faith is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was that event, and to be quite honest, it was my children. Because then when we moved here in 2015, 2016 to the Atlanta area, and we're getting them into schools and found a wonderful Christian school to put our girls in, and just their desire and what they were learning, I'll tell you what, it challenged my wife and I.
Dude, I love that.
Because they had Bible verses every week, and they had to memorize and to study in Scripture, and they had Bible class every day. And what they would come home and talk about, I'm like, man, I need to be a part of this conversation, so I need to dive in and dig deeper and find some guidance to them because they're teaching me. And awesome. I thought it was amazing, but that challenged my wife and I to really, up the ante, so to speak, in our religious beliefs and our faith and just daily life.
It's wild because Jesus knew that. I mean, Jesus says, if we can have the faith of a child, that there's personal faith is not meant to be complex, and yet we make it complex because we're complex, right?
Yes.
And yet children come to faith in such a simple way, but it's such a pure way. And so I love that idea that you guys were really impacted. I've heard that story so many times through the years, having had the privilege of being in Christian education for a little over 3 decades now. I've watched so many times where kids will begin to take their faith seriously, and then you'll watch the parents grow as well because of it.
Right?
How awesome is that? Like that God kind of designed it in that way. Pretty amazing.
It's amazing. It just shows that if you think you know everything, or you're not in this lifelong learning journey,
right?
You're never too old to learn something.
Yeah.
No matter what, and it goes to leadership.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be the oldest person in the room is the leader,
right?
Or those that achieve the most,
right?
You can have leaders that just have that natural ability, right? And when the kids can do it and they step up and they're leaders in some aspect, I think it's just a beautiful thing. And that's something that Laurie and I, man, we are so blessed that our kids, are on that path. Yeah. And that's what gives us so much joy and like to see that.
Right.
And that they challenge us,
right?
Because I feel like I've been challenged in my life. My wife, we've all been challenged as adults, but we've all had life experiences, good and bad. But when you put in the context of the kids and them learning some of these things at 10, 11 years old, there's nothing more rewarding as a parent.
I love that. That's great. And it's fun to be on this side of it where you're watching your kids grow. The Bible talks a lot about the idea that there's no greater joy than to know that your children are walking in the truth or in the light. And boy, that's so true. That when you see your kids living a faith-filled life, I look at both of my children and good grief, they are so far ahead of where I was at both of their ages. And our kids are adults, 27, 25. But man, they're so far ahead of where I was. And it's just awesome. Like there's just no greater joy, than
100%,
that, you know?
100%.
All right. So let's jump back into high school. You've got a 4-year period there. You are just having pretty remarkable. I mean, I went through and kind of followed a number of those pieces. Tell me what it looks like for you to go from high school into college ball. Like what were the challenges there? Why did you choose Virginia? Walk me through some of that.
So I was very fortunate throughout my high school years to go to camps, in the summertime, whether it was after my sophomore year or junior year, to go visit some schools, and my parents would take me to go meet some coaches so I could develop an idea of what I was interested in or what I liked about some of the colleges that were recruiting me. But when I boiled it down, the experience that I had when I went to University of Virginia and met the coaches and got a feel for the university, it just felt right. It was just something that clicked that no other place gave me that.
Right. So you just knew.
I just knew as soon as I got there, and I committed before my senior season.
Oh, did you really?
I did. And,
okay.
The recruiting landscape was vastly different back in the 90s than it is now. You had one national signing day, which was in February, but I hadn't had enough experiences and had enough meetings and talks, and I just wanted it out of the way. Mm-hmm. I knew at that point that football was going to be what I wanted to pursue.
Right.
More so than baseball or even basketball. But while I love those sports, but it just felt right. And I wanted that decision out of the way. I didn't want to be a distraction, and I just wanted to enjoy my senior season, my senior year with my friends. So I was definitely fortunate just from that combination that they were offered academically, athletically, and it was just a great fit for me.
On campus here, just because of where we're located just outside of Atlanta, we, as you know, we have a bunch of professional athletes on campus, who have their kids here. I've got a bunch of formerly professional athletes who are on staff here. When you jump into Virginia, were you thinking like, hey, this is going to give me a free ride for college? This is where, were you already thinking pro at that spot? Like, does that cross your mind? 'Cause I've talked to different guys, and for some guys, they're like, yeah, I'm on this that's where I wanted to go from day one. And some guys are like, listen, no idea at all, right? Never even crossed my mind.
Right. To me, the biggest jump athletically in football was from high school to college. The difference the difference in the game. And the speed of the game.
Okay.
Growing up outside Philadelphia, like we ran for anyone listening that knows football, we ran a wing tee offense. Like we were like Navy and Army. Like if we threw it 10 times, like it got in the headlines because we didn't throw it that much until my senior season. But that was the biggest jump just from on the field. But I caution young people, and this is the way I looked at it, and I distinctly remember this. The NFL wasn't even it was a dream, but it wasn't a goal.
Right.
I just wanted to wanted to get on the field. Like I was recruited, I was redshirting my first year. I wanted to figure out how to be a college student athlete. That was my big goal. And Virginia presents itself enough challenges in the classroom, but to also learn how to be a quarterback in Division I football, that was something I had to develop and learn, and had to get in the weight room and develop my body and just everything. But it was probably going into my fourth year, my junior year, so to speak. That's when I was like, okay, this went from a dream to possibly playing the NFL to, okay, this is a goal now.
Was it really? So junior year, that's when that changed.
That's when it changed. I was rotated off and on with another player, another quarterback my sophomore year.
Right.
But then I was the guy my
junior year,
so I
you
had
took
2
over.
years.
Right.
Yes. And so that was when it became a goal. It went from a dream, okay, now I'm actually the starter.
Right.
And looking forward, I have 2 years, and if I can produce and play well and develop, there's a chance that I can go to the NFL. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't like a reality at that point. It wasn't until going into my senior, because there's steps, there's progression to doing that.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. And I just think for any kids out there, like, set your dreams and goals, but have your goals be short term.
Right.
And as you go through, then you reevaluate and develop them. And while that dream is still out there, you have to build up to it. You can't just say, that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
There's steps along the way that you have to progress.
When we talk about that from a faith perspective, when we recognize the sovereignty of God, that he's in control of our path, he's the one directing our path. We don't even have to look at, I was chatting with a good friend who was applying for a job just a couple days ago, and super faith-filled guy, like really understanding where he is in Christ. He didn't get the job. And he wasn't bummed out at all. Like even though it was a job he was really excited about, he didn't look at that as not getting chosen for the job. He looked at it as God directing his path. His path is going to go in a different direction. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt when he does land his gig, because he does feel like he's supposed to leave where he's at. When he does land his gig, he's going to look back in hindsight and say, "Oh, this is exactly God's path."
Sure.
So it's that mindset.
It is. You if you succeed in everything and everything goes your way when you try to attempt something, there's a very little room for growth.
Right.
And you can learn a lot from, successes and achievements, but more often than not, the things that we try and we fail at, or we don't get the job, or we don't, get to the NFL or whatever, we don't get chosen for something, that's a chance to learn and reevaluate and assess, like, okay, where can I be better?
Right.
How can I do this differently next time? And you become better, but also there is God has another plan. And to look at it in that lens, it's okay, then you go and you improve and you get better and you evaluate. So many people don't want to evaluate themselves critically or in a negative way.
Right.
Exactly. They and that's something that, again, to young people, the culture and the society tells them that they're good, that they're okay, and that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing to reevaluate. Well, it's okay to be humble enough to say, I need to be better.
That's right.
And how do I do that?
Right. And those are usually the guys who succeed at the highest level, when they are willing to be introspective, whether that's football or whether that's business or whatever it might be. It's that idea of being introspective. All right. You talked about I just have to hit on it just because it is something that's deeply passionate for me with what I do for a living, the landscape of recruiting into college. So just kind of give us a snapshot of what has changed. Is it for the better? Is it for the worse? Like what does that look like in comparison to your recruitment in college to what our current college athletes are going through?
Well, I can only imagine what's happening nowadays and the rules that
it's the Wild West, man.
It's insane.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But for me growing up and just going to my experience, I mean, there was a certain dates on the calendar coaches could contact you, but then it was like they can call your coach, they could call the house, that for anyone out there, you had landlines. There was no cell phones either. Right. So they can call you. They could write letters. So a lot of it was handwritten or typed letters from the university, and often the ones that were handwritten meant the most, because then they're taking the time. It's just not a standard letter when they just put Matt at the top. And then that was really how everything was communicated. And then their recruiting coaches would come to the schools and they'd meet with you there. They'd talk to the head coach. They'd talk to everybody. So there was really a personal feel to it. Now I feel like the NIL stage and the transfer portal in college, there's so many, things that are going on and people that can talk to you, and there's so many rules, and social media is a big factor in how they can handle the communication to some of these kids and how they're influenced. That landscape is so broad and so vast that, kids, I feel for how they are impacted just on a constant basis, because you're 1 degree of separation from anybody,
right? And
you can be contacted any time,
right,
on all these apps and with cell phones. And so the NCAA, I think, really has something that they have to really look at, and how and you look at kids that are getting recruited in 8th grade and 9th grade.
It's
and they're not even fully developed or know if that's the sport that they love. And it's just, let's get back to where your 10th, 11th grade maybe, and you're starting to get contact, because now, there's a body of work to look at.
So as an athlete who you're going through college, you are playing at an extremely elite level. Junior year, you take over the show. So now you're the quarterback. You are running the thing. Clearly, listen, you're involved. You are the reason that ticket sales are taking place, at least a big part of that, What do you think about college athletes making money during that period of time? For it, against it? What's your thoughts on that?
When it first started, I was against it just because I couldn't reap the benefits of it when I played. So there was a cynical side to it. But I do think it's been a long time coming, and I think that there's really something there that players, with how much they bring into universities to the conferences they play in, that they should develop some sort of payment for their name, image, and likeness. Right. How it's been implemented is another conversation. And I think that's just where the Wild West comes in, and the NCAA has really been hands off in their approach. And that, I think, is a major disservice to the kids. Yeah. and the student athletes and all student athletes, not just the football players, because everyone's impacted in some way. But I'm definitely for it.
Right. You look at the bigger programs. I mean, they are bringing in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars off of those programs. Listen, I'm all for it too. I'd say, listen, that stud athlete is bringing in serious money for the college. They should be an employee of the university.
Right. And the one thing is that I have a problem with is the pay for play.
Right.
And I think that's where there really needs to be some guardrails.
Right.
I think the kids need to do something back.
Right.
And I think that's where some colleges are trying to do it better.
Yeah.
And like players have to show up for an appearance or do some community outreach work in order to receive their funds.
Right.
And not just, hey, this is a signing bonus. If you come here, you're going to get X dollars. And that's where you can get boosters and collectives and all these groups just throw money at these high school kids. And it's hard to not jump at that because it's so outrageous.
And for just the people listening, I mean, we're not talking about $10. We're talking about millions of dollars in some cases for these young athletes who are coming through. I think we're kind of living in the Wild West between NIL and the portal changes that have taken place where kids can trade in and trade out and there's no sit-out season. I think those two things make athletics a bit corrupt. I think that where it probably lands at the end of it, it probably is best if the athletes are simply employees of the university and you kind of stop the under the table stuff and negotiate very much like a professional athlete, you know, where they have that opportunity. A lot of the guys get to college play. And that's as far as they're going, you know, and some of them know that. Some of them have the hope of in this case, NFL. Some of them know that NFL is not going to be a live option for them. And so if they can get some NIL money, if they can get some deals on the front side, that's the only thing that they have.
Well, and for some of them, if they get to the NFL, they're taking a pay cut maybe in the first couple of years.
Truth, yeah. If you're coming in at minimum, you know,
So they're willing to jump from year to year to university to chase an NIL deal because they do realize, okay, I may not be developing to be that quarterback in the NFL or that player in the next level. And so they're trying to max out everything they can. But at the same time, how are they handling that from a human, from a lifelong standpoint? What are they doing to their psyche and their mental makeup and just the ability to not honor a contract or not being able to just stick it out and
keep your word,
your accountability to your teammates.
Right. I was watching an interview with a guy who's a junior and he's at his 7th school as a junior. Right. And so, I mean, you haven't fulfilled any contract, but all he's doing is he said, listen, I'm under no delusion. I'm never going to play professional ball. I'm a pretty decent college player. I was a very good high school player. But I'm probably not good enough to hit the next level. I want to start my own business when I graduate from college. And he's like, you know, I'm hopping schools because I'm going where the money is.
Sure.
Because I want to have the seed money for a business. You know, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. Intriguing. But you're right. What does it do to that kid's psyche to be in 7 different programs in a matter of 3 years?
At least he has some long-term plan.
Right.
And he has a good outlook and reason for doing it. So many, I think he's the exception, not the rule.
I agree.
And I think most are just chasing a dollar.
Right.
But then, okay, when you get out of school, if your sport is not an avenue for you, how does what you just went through and the decisions you made affect your chance for employment?
That's right.
What does the employer look at when they interview you? And they see that you just bounced from place to place, chasing a comma and a dollar sign. Right.
Well, and I think if you ingrain it into who you are, that you chase the next big thing. Hey, listen, that can then impact our marriage. Where you're like, hey, when all marriages are hard, right? I mean, you go through, if you've been married to somebody for a long period of time, everything hasn't been just rainbows and roses. Like it's you go through hard times, and you've got to make the decision to stay. But if you've ingrained it in your personality to go. Jump ship when things get tough, or jump ship when there's a better deal that comes along. I think it can impact everything.
100%. I agree.
So all right. So now we're jumping back to college of Virginia. Junior, you've taken over the show. Junior year, senior year. Just what does recruitment look like going into the bigs? Like, what does that process look like when you're being contacted by the NFL teams? Just walk us through that kind of whole craziness.
Sure. When my college career was coming to an end, it was about trying to find an agent to help be that buffer between yourself and the teams and the owners and general managers. Okay. So my parents were big help in finding those people and handling a lot of those conversations as I was playing my senior year. And then we were able to make a process, and we whittled it down to a handful and had some meetings. And so once I found out who that was, then you go off and you train. Right. And I was in my 5th year in school, so I had graduated after 4, was in grad school that fall, but then I didn't take classes in the spring. So I went to go train out in California on my agent's dollar. He had a trainer, and so there was probably 8 of us that were training together to get ready for the NFL Combine, which was in February, and then our Pro Day, which was in March. And so you go through all this training to, go run a 40-yard dash or go get ready for the drills that you're going to be put through and the interviews you're going to be put through by coaches and general managers. So it is very much a dog and pony show, because then when you go to the Combine, you're there for 3 days. You have medical evaluations.
Right. I love watching the Combine, by the way. Every year, I love it. It has changed so much, but you just see these phenomenal specimens of mankind, like just who are just you watch these great big linemen, this guy weighs 340 pounds, and yet he's literally running faster than any high school kid out there, and he's a lineman, this massive human. You just think, holy smokes,
yes,
he's made to do this.
Well, the NFL really found a way to monetize the NFL Combine, because it was not televised back in 2004 when I was coming out of college. But once you go through that, then you go back to your working out, and then you go to your school for its Pro Day, where the coaches all come to campus, and it's more of controlled by you, the player, and what you want to show them. Right. But then after that, it was probably a month later was when the draft happened. So there's a lot of set breakups in the time and the events that go through. And so once that Pro Day was done, really everything was finished at that point. For me, some players have individual workouts that teams want to take a closer look, but that's when all the hay was in the barn for me.
So your first team's the Falcons. When does that recruitment happen? Do you not know until the actual recruitment day? What does that look like?
I had no idea.
You didn't really? Seriously? Okay.
I did not. For those that listening, Michael Vick was the quarterback at the time. One of the most visible, popular athletes in the world. He was coming off his one injury where he did not play in the year before in 2003. He was out with a leg injury that he sustained the year before. I had one conversation at the Combine with a member from the Atlanta Falcons staff, and that was the offensive coordinator, who was new. Their whole staff was new coming into that season. That was it, and it was during the meetings, and it was on a bench at the one hotel. I had an open time slot, and he grabbed me, and we had a little bit of a conversation because I had some college coaches that he knew, and so it was just a quick conversation, right? Fast forward to draft day, and the draft was wildly different than it is now. Now it's a made for TV.
Oh yeah, it's
every
an
night.
Event.
It is. Before it was Saturday, Sunday. There were 3 rounds on Saturday, 4 on Sunday, and that was it. Right. And I'm there at my apartment and had family, friends in that Saturday because I knew where I was kind of in the quarterback pecking order.
Sure. And you came in as quarterback. I mean, you were there, Eli Manning. Yes. Ben Roethlisberger, like just some big names that are taking place in the same season as you, right?
Sure, and I think people still rank it as one of the top quarterback classes, and more so for the other guys you named, Eli, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger. So I knew about where in that order and what teams were interested in quarterbacks, but fast forward to the 3rd round, and it's late in the evening, and I hadn't gotten a call yet. And
how late is late?
It was probably 9:15. Yeah. But it was in the 3rd round.
And you're still with everybody in your apartment?
Everyone's still there. We're watching it on TV.
So
cool. Some teams that I thought were interested, Cleveland, Green Bay at the time, because this is when Favre was still there. Aaron Rodgers was the next draft class after me. So it was like, okay, they passed. They didn't go on for a quarterback. So I was like, okay, it might be day 2, round 4, because at this point we're at pick 90. And there are 7-8 more picks in the 3rd round. And I get a call, and my parents, who live in Marietta, Georgia at the time, and they still do, they know the area codes from which the Atlanta phone numbers are from, right? And I don't really know, but I get a call, and it shows up, don't know it, but it's Atlanta. And I answer it, and it's the general manager, Rich McKay at the time, and Jim Moore was the head coach. And they say, hey, we want to pick you. And I was floored because I had one conversation. They gave no idea that they were interested in taking a quarterback, at least in the first day of that draft. So then my immediate thought was, okay, I'm being drafted to back up Mike Vick. we couldn't be too drastically different.
So
different quarterbacks.
Right, so different.
Yes, and he went to Virginia Tech. I went to Virginia, natural rivals. This is like bizarre, but I was like, all right, I need to go out and start running, because I got to get faster if I want to, model after him if I have to go in.
Right.
So that was kind of how that came to be.
Right. Now you jumped in your first year. Were you minimum?
I was.
You were, and so you jump in on that. You're playing behind someone. How hard is that? Like, I've always wondered this. Here you're going through Virginia. You are running the show. Again, you're such a humble guy. I've so appreciated our friendship. But you're such a you're the reason ticket sales are increased. Like, the seasons you're having are pretty phenomenal. You go in and now you're playing behind somebody. How hard is that?
It wasn't hard at all, to be honest, because of who I was going in to back up.
Okay.
It was well stated. He was the guy, and like I was coming in to learn and develop into how to be a pro. Right. Not just as a football player, but be a professional, like, in life. And like, you're getting out of college now, you don't have coaches in college. They look after your every need. Maybe you're going to class. No one holds your hand once you get to the NFL. You're now in the real world, right? And but for me, it was a chance to learn, develop, grow, watch a guy that was hounded by media, constantly scrutinized. He was coming off an injury. So for me, on the field, I got a ton of opportunities in the preseason, and back then there were 4 games. Right. So I played a ton and got so much experience of, while it wasn't regular season, it's still, live play. Yeah. And so, got thrown to the wolves a little bit in the preseason, and that was so valuable for me because that gave me tape that all teams watch. Right. And when you're a backup and you can show you can play over the course of a whole preseason, then combine that with year 2 in the preseason and 3, then teams are more apt to, maybe look at when your contract's up, come to sign you as a free agent or trade for you. And so that gave me a bunch of tape to be able to go off of and show, hey, I can play at this level. Okay.
You made a comment earlier that the adjustment from high school ball to college ball was even a larger transition than college to pro. Explain that to me a little bit.
And to me, I was fortunate. I'm an outlier probably when I say that, just from the standpoint of my learning curve, from the playbook standpoint. I had an offense in college my last 3 years that modeled what I came into in the NFL. Like 75% of it, the terminology, how everything was constructed was very similar. And so the learning curve on the playbook was much less than what other players face. Okay. And so I was fortunate and really blessed to have the coaches that I had, because there was a lot of carryover for me. Now, the game speed, that was different. Getting used to, wide open receivers in college is wildly different than the NFL. Right. So getting used to that, that was a challenge. But also that was where the coaching and my fundamentals, you lean on that a little bit. Right. But more when I said that, it's more from a playbook standpoint and learning.
I got it. Had you already met Lori at that point in time?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So you're with Atlanta for 2 seasons or 3 seasons? 3 seasons. And then you end up getting drafted to Houston, and now it goes pretty big time for you.
It did. Yeah, it did. So I met Laurie in my second season. Okay. It was actually a teammate of mine, his golf tournament, charity golf tournament, and she was good friends with his. I forget if they were married at the time, but his girlfriend or soon-to-be wife at the time, I forget. They were good friends, so she was there, and so we met. But then there was a time period after that before we actually started dating. Okay. But so we were introduced by them. In 2005, started dating in 2006. But at the time we were dating, that was my last year here, because then I got traded to Houston. Right. And so that was my opportunity that I had shown for 3 years that I could start. And they came and traded for me to come in and be their starter.
So 4th season, you jump in with Houston and jump in on a pretty stratospheric contract, I mean, just remarkable. We were chatting even in Bible study this morning about just the idea of whether our money controls us or whether we control our money. How does somebody jump into that? Like, even when you made minimum, Dad's working for the railroad, I'm not sure whether you were at that point in time making more than Dad, or not. But like, when you jump in on those things, how do you manage to not allow money to take over?
Right. It's a challenge. I mean, I think everyone faces their own challenges with regards to that, but I was fortunate to have a really stable upbringing and my parents that taught me the values of it and taught me responsible spending and things of that nature, but also surrounding myself with people in the professional world that could tell me no. Right. And were helping me manage those things from a financial advisor standpoint, who I've had the same one since I was a rookie.
Oh, really?
For 20 years now. And he's basically part of our family and really good agent. And so just people around that could say no. Too many people have just yes people around them, and people to affirm their thoughts and go do that, go spend that, go buy that, but what people don't realize is as a professional athlete, you're paid during your season. Right. And then it's the season of famine, so to speak, all off season. So from January to August, there's no checks coming in unless you have endorsements and all that stuff. But from the team, that's it. Right. And so you have to be able to budget and be able to, set aside your living expenses. Right. And then you decide from there what you want to do. But for me, it wasn't too hard of a challenge just because I've had the people around me, a great support system, and people that taught me the values beforehand. And
now there's a lot of safeguards for professional athletes as far as, what their mandatory investments look like. The team provides a ton. Back in the day, I'm a decent chunk older than you are, but back in the day, you'd hear about these professional athletes who were just making oodles of cash, like just insane money, and yet like 5 years after they finish out with their pro career, they're bankrupt. You know, and you look at these guys who have just made decisions; they're living so high that it's just not sustainable. Right. So I love that idea that one, you still have the guidance of mom and dad, but you've also put around you a community of people who are actually providing really good, solid, long-term advice. Right. Such a good lesson for all of us 100%. In regard to that. All right, walk me through the time that you were with Houston, and 7 seasons with them. And so walk me through 7 seasons with that. Are there certain games that really stand out for you? I'm so glad you made that face because I am so intrigued every time I've interviewed a friend who's a former professional athlete. Man, they always have just those games that just stand out. What's your thoughts?
There's so many. Okay. And if Laurie was here, she would tell you I often remember the hard ones. Okay. And the ones that challenged me. They might have been losses. They might have been things that went wrong. Because I remember you always remember the plays like the interception. The game you threw one that went back for a touchdown and it was in overtime and you lost. Right. Versus, man, that one throw was so great. It was perfect. Andre Johnson down the field. But those things, they kind of fade in the distance. Right. It's often the hard ones. But yeah, there's plenty of games that we can go over. I'm sure we don't have time for it, but the things that I remember, and I'm sure this is kind of lip service for a lot that have talked to former professional athletes, but you miss the guys, you miss the locker room, you miss the times. It's the stuff, the intangibles that aren't between the white lines that you miss and you value. And when you get together with those guys, you reminisce and you talk about the plane rides, going into another team stadium and beating them and listening to 70,000 walk out of there silent. That's like the coolest experience. But
I love that.
Yeah, but the wins and just things like they kind of just fade in the distance.
I just as I was preparing for our talk today, I've only known you as another guy, right? A friend. And so it's fun to just, go through and watch different footage. And I was watching your game when you were playing the Chargers and you guys had that huge comeback. So I was watching footage of that and just seeing your elation in the game afterwards. I mean, what does a scene like that feel like for you? That was the greatest comeback that your franchise had ever seen. And I think it was maybe even the biggest comeback at that point in time, maybe even for NFL. But tell me, I'm sure that lives in your head. Well, at least I'm assuming that lives in your head. Maybe that doesn't. Yeah,
sometimes those feelings do. I mean, that your euphoric feeling of winning the game when you were basically your back is against the wall and there's nowhere to go. Right. And, the scrutiny and the microscope you're under is so defined, and when you can overcome some tough a tough start to a game and a deficit like that, when you can come back and you can win, you know, that bleeds into other areas of your life, because it shows you what you can accomplish, not just yourself, but personally, but as a team. When you have people around you and the accountability and what you go through from one game to the next, you know, because each game and each competition is different, how it transpires, but it's the work you put in, and there's no shortcuts for that work. And when you see all that come to fruition and you know, play out, you know, it's a great feeling. It really is.
Now, when we look at kind of the seasons that you had there with Houston, you talked kind of about the shock that it was to be traded to the Raiders after that. At this point in time, now Lori's on the scene.
Yes.
You a couple of your kids were already born during this period of time. What does that look like? Tell me about, like, when, you know, what does that shock feel like? What does that change feel like?
Sure. And fortunate that I'm blessed. Laurie and I, we're coming up on 17 years married now. Congrats. And so very fortunate. You know, she's a blessing in my life. And our kids, you know, they were young while I was going through my last 3 years in Houston. So they don't remember a lot of the things, but you know, they're impacted so much by the good and the bad that, you know, I was doing on the field or our team. You know, as one of the faces of the club. You know, you get blamed often far too much when things don't go well, and you're praised way too much when things go well. And so they often have find a lot of those repercussions in their daily life. And we had a season like that. And this was kind of a dark period in my life professionally, and that bled over into, you know, my personal being in 2013. And that was my last season with the Houston Texans. We had a great team. In 2011 and 12, we were building something. And in 2011 and 12, we could have easily found ourselves at the end of the road holding up a trophy, and we didn't. We fell short. There's only one team that can do that. And then 2013, a lot of expectations, and it didn't go great. I got benched. You know, I got booed in our home stadium. I was cheered for when I got hurt and had to, you know, be helped off the field that year. There was a lot of things, and I'm not looking for any sympathy or anything like that, but my kids also feel the repercussions from that, because then people know where you live. And they'll drive by, they'll yell things, they'll scream at things. My jersey was burned in the parking lot at the stadium, like things like that. Like, it's the polarization of what you do in professional sports or any profession. Like, people are so committed to the outcome that it's hard for them to see the human behind it when you take the helmet off or take the jersey off. And so that was a tough period. And so come to the end of that season, you know, I got traded before my contract expired. And so that was very difficult. But I understood what was happening. But when you have kids and it's not just you and your wife or just you, those things are not as difficult to undertake. But when you have young children and you're moving and now you're going somewhere where, okay, I have a 2-year contract, I got traded, but what's going to happen? The only 1 year's guaranteed. And my wife is pregnant at the time, 4 or 5 months pregnant. Like, there's a lot to negotiate and to handle when you have those things.
Did you guys move as a family?
We did.
You did.
Some
athletes don't. Like, some athletes keep a home base, and then just play and fly home.
Yes, and I was not going to be apart from my family.
I couldn't handle it.
I needed them with me. They were my rock. They were my stable factor. But I did go for the off season to, you know, condition with my team for practices. I did go to Oakland, Monday through Thursday. And then I'd fly back on the weekends, and they would stay there because the kids were in a small little preschool. But once the summer came, then I found a rental home, and they moved.
I think sometimes fans, it's like you're playing video games, you know, and you could be playing Matt Schaub, you know, and they forget that Matt Schaub's actually a human. Like, it's actually a person. You know, he's not a video game character, you know. And so, people can sometimes be so vicious. And then you add in social media, you add in all those components. It's like, you just forget that this is actually a living, breathing person who hurts and who goes through those times. It's strange, right? You know,
it is. And fantasy football was becoming popular. So, I mean, often, even at times of wins and successes, people are mad because you fell a few yards short or whatever and hurt their fantasy team. And that was another factor that, you know, plays in a lot of people's minds.
Like, literally, happiness is derived from whether your fantasy character. I mean, it's just wild, right, to think about that. All right, so we go Raiders. Just one season, though.
One season
and
there.
And then Ravens.
And then I basically was cut because that season played out. I got released, and then I signed with the Baltimore Ravens for another 1-year deal. And so we actually, in the transition from Oakland to Baltimore, we had sold our house in Houston.
Okay.
And so we really didn't have a home, so to speak, because we were in a rental. And that's where we knew when we were done with the NFL that we wanted to be back in the Southeast. My wife grew up in Birmingham, went to Auburn. We met in Atlanta, have a lot of friends here beyond the football field.
Yeah.
And so we knew we wanted to settle back here. And so we found a home here, moved to Atlanta while being signed by Baltimore. And so I went up there again, the same transition I did from Houston to Oakland. Went up, trained, found a rental home. Once the summer came, they moved up there for the football season while we had our home base that we were developing here in Atlanta.
And I love the fact that you landed back with the Falcons.
I love that part of it.
Like when I see your story and see just the highs and the lows and just the humanity of it. But the idea that you come back to the Falcons, you're playing behind Matt Ryan.
Yes.
Walk me through that just a little bit, because I love this story.
Well, and for what a lot of people don't know, and I don't know if it's really in the story, is like the coach that I was somewhat chasing from my Houston days.
Right.
It just didn't happen that we could work out the deal or the trade. Kyle Shanahan, who was the offensive coordinator here at the time, who had been in Cleveland, he was with me in Houston. And so we had a really good relationship, and I wanted to try to get back and play in an offense that he was running. And it just so happened when my season in Baltimore ended that they were looking here, that they, meaning the Atlanta Falcons, were looking for a backup to Matt Ryan at the time. And so we were able to work that out. Dan Quinn, the head coach, good. Kyle is the offensive coordinator. And I knew Matt from our time just playing against one another, but also we grew up in the same area, Pennsylvania. So it was a very comfortable,
and a real
union,
solid guy, just a
great
real solid guy. Yeah.
And so the quarterback room was just phenomenal to be a part of on the day-to-day. But the fact that we went this route from Houston, Oakland to Baltimore, and while that, we mentioned our time in Oakland with my son being born and how that was our place that God was placing us and moved us to. I just feel like there was so much divine intervention that we took this path to wind up at the place we were going to live.
It is divine intervention.
It is.
I love that.
And I was fortunate to be a part of 5 seasons here for a great franchise, a great team, while putting my family in a place where we were going to live and have them set their roots.
Right, putting down roots.
Yes.
Yeah. And so 17 seasons altogether in NFL. I mean, what an amazing career. What just amazing opportunities. You're now an analyst with the Falcons. Arthur Blank has said a lot about you as well as the owner. Were you able to connect with Mr. Blank? Were you able to connect with him?
I was, and I think starting out with this organization back in 2004 through 2006 really laid that foundation, that groundwork, because he was very heavily involved in the day-to-day.
I love that he's involved.
And
I just think it's amazing.
He understands it's about people. And that's his thing,
right?
And it always has been. Right. He loves the family side of it, the people that he connects with, the football stuff. He lets the people that are in charge of handling the football, let them do their job.
I follow him a lot anyway. You know, we're in this region. I'm just impressed with him as a business person, a billionaire, but a billionaire with a real heart for people, and somebody who has business acumen that's insane. But somebody who really knows his players, and I've heard that from so many different of his guys, that he really knows his guys, and is really interested in who they are.
Yes.
I've just been so impressed with him as a leader.
Well, and what he does in the community with children, especially. I mean, it's just remarkable what he's done, with his personal wealth and finances. But you mentioned the people side of it. Oftentimes he would come out to practice, and he'd just come up and he'd just walk behind all the guys when they're on the sideline, and he'd just stand there, and he could care less what was going on between the lines in practice, but he put his arm around you, be like, "Hey, how's everybody? How's the family? How's your folks?" That was who he is.
Awesome.
And so it's just
so
great.
Rare.
Very rare.
I mean, certain guys, might get wealthy and you think, "Oh man, what a shame," But with a guy like him, you really do think, man, I'm glad he does, just because he knows the responsibility and he invests back into our community here in the Atlanta region, but all over the place, but really heavily into this region. I just love it when you see guys who have been blessed, but they're really giving back. It's pretty neat.
It's a great example for everybody.
Right. So what does your role as an analyst, what does that look like right now?
Well, not just to correct you a little bit, I was an analyst for the team last season.
Okay.
I was on their coaching staff, helping the head coach at the time, Arthur Smith, with game management, situational football stuff, some of the details of calling a game that sometimes the head coach or play caller can be distracted, and they're not. And so my job was to help with challenges on the field or usage of timeouts and the clock management. So that was my role, and it was one that I really enjoyed. I just like being connected to the game. Currently, though, I am an analyst, but I'm on the radio with Virginia football for their sports radio network, and so I'm calling 4 games this season. I have 1 more to go at the end of the football season. Go and do their game against Virginia Tech, and just help with the operation and some of the color and the detail.
Going back to the alma mater.
Yes, sir.
That is awesome. I love that. Matt, it's so cool, man. Through your whole story, you mentioned the phrase, which I think is really apropos of what we see here, but divine intervention. It's just this idea that God has directed your path. You know, as you've been a professional athlete, as you've been a man, as you've been a follower of Christ, to recognize moving from religion to personal faith, and to really see where that is. Any big lessons that you're learning right now as just a guy, as just a man, as just a dad, as just a father, you know, like any big lessons you're learning right now?
I learn them every day.
Yeah.
And that's a credit to, you know, my wife, my kids, because they teach me, and they might not know it, but every day, just on a simple ride to school, I just learn more about them and about myself and how I can be better.
That's good
and
stuff.
Then, you know, go home and like, all 5 of our kids are now in school full time all day. So then we get home and we're going about our routine, and we'll just have a conversation, and we're just trying to figure out how we can be the best parents we can be because of the world and the culture and the society that we're raising kids in.
Right.
And we're blessed to have a great home here at Hebron.
Yeah, we love having you here.
You know, we're just blessed that our kids are on walking the path, and that they're on a great track. And so, again, another form of divine intervention with the people we've been put them in front of, because we've been called and they've been shown to us as parents that we're just like, this is the right place, or this is the right team for them, or whatever it is. And we're just trying to make sure that day to day that we're doing the best we can for our marriage, for our kids, and then we can be a good example to them.
Yeah. It's pretty neat to see just godly guys who are living in that sphere. You being impacted with Atlanta right now, we got Kirk Cousins in there, who's a really godly guy as well. And it's just a blessing to really see guys who have made the decision to walk in his path and take every day with that mindset. It's great to have you as a friend. It's great to get to know you better. It's just awesome to be able to see how God has directed your life and how you've remained faithful in it. And man, it's great having you on the show today as well.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really, really been a great time.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.